Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. With me today, of course, is Peter Lavelle, who I think is a little under the weather. I'm sorry to hear it, but this is the last of winter, and so a lot of people are
It's a
suffering the
good thing we do
effects.
it. We do it sitting down, and I have plenty of water, so I should be okay.
So, Peter, we've had this has been a very, very eventful week. I mean, we started off with that meeting between the very high level foreign affairs team of the United States, including Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, and Steve Witkoff, representing the American side, and then of course we had Sergei Lavrov representing the Russian side. That was in Riyadh. Apparently, it all went very well. And then we had the meltdown, complete meltdown in much of Europe. And in the media, naturally, with a vested interest in keeping this war going, but also in the, the sort of foreign policy establishment and among politicos. There was
And did you notice that there was a huge pushback on Twitter? Huge. I've never seen anything like it. Okay, anything like it. Okay.
right, exactly. Um, and but what then happened was really interesting because then Trump, who didn't appreciate Zelensky's complaining that he had been excluded from this meeting, then lashed out correctly at Zelensky and said, "Well, you could have got a peace deal for 3 years. What were you doing all this time?" This of course caused uproar, but because as always happens with Trump, he blurts out what is obvious. You didn't want, you had an opportunity for 3 years to come to an agreement. You didn't do it. Um, and then Rubio did the not Rubio, sorry, Zelensky did the unpardonable thing of saying that Trump was living in a web of disinformation, and at that point, Trump really let him have it. So I just want to go through a little bit of this
Oh,
some
wait,
of
before we
the
go
yeah,
there,
sure.
um, um, uh, Ukraine started the war motif, which
Mhm.
Trump, it was a very poor choice of words. If I had been
But he,
advised,
to be honest, to be fair, he didn't. Trump did not say Ukraine started the war.
but he implied it, right? Okay, that
I,
was the
I, I think that's all media said he implied it.
yeah, yeah. Well, the
He
thing
said
is,
it should. He says it shouldn't have happened. Ukraine should have avoided this. Yeah.
and but what I would have sentence spliced in is that Ukraine, you volunteered for this. See, I would have used that. Now, I
Right.
would have caused the same kind of uproar.
Right. No, no. But yeah, but I do think that the way, yes, it's always the case with Trump, is that you know what he means.
Yeah,
He,
but he's not precise.
he's not precise, but what he's saying is a commonsensical, which is, hey, you're a small country next to a big country. You really don't want to provoke a big country. You should use your intelligence and minimum of diplomatic skills to avoid a serious confrontation with a big country, and that's kind of what he meant. Now, then that was interpreted in the media. Oh, he's saying Ukraine started the war, but he never really said that. But anyway, if just look at the 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 coverage, and here we have the New York Times presenting in this way: Trump's pivot toward Putin's Russia upends generations of U.S. policy. Now, this is always the way these stories are framed, that there are apparently these generations of U.S. policy, all consistently anti-Russian, anti-Soviet, and unthinkable for any U.S. president to meet or say anything favorable about any Soviet Russian leader. Total falsehood. So, it's a minimum examination of the historical record will know that it's absolutely untrue. But no one other than Trump has spoken
Well,
favorably about Russian
yeah,
leaders.
but George, history only started 15 seconds ago, right?
Exactly. That's exactly that's and they're counting on people's ignorance. That well, look, boy, Trump's really breaking things here. Um, And then as peace talks opened in Saudi Arabia, President Trump made clear that the days of isolating Russia are over and
No, he
suggested
didn't. He
he
didn't
didn't say
say
that.
that.
Exactly. I agree. He didn't say that. And suggested Ukraine was to blame for being invaded. And then it says, speaking at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, he went on, you have a leadership now that's allowed a war to go on that should never even happen. You see, that's the way he presented it, which I think is correct. You have a leadership now that's allowed a war to go on that should have never even happened. Because, I mean, he didn't mention Istanbul, but that may well have been on his mind. Hey, there could have been a deal 3 years ago. Um, and then by contrast, Mr. Trump uttered not one word of reproach for Mr. Putin or for Russia, which first invaded Ukraine in 2014, waged a low intensity war against it through all 4 years of Mr. Trump's first term, and then invaded it in 2022, aiming to take over the whole country. Of course, we leave out the war waged by Kiev against its own people, killing its own people. That
Up in even more than 14,000 people. Okay.
yeah. Mr. Trump is in the middle of executing. This is great. This is middle of executing one of the most jaw-dropping. Always get the cliche in jaw-dropping.
Is this an editorial or is this a
This
news?
is a news story.
Oh,
You
okay.
can't distinguish between
Okay.
between news stories and editorials these days. Mr. Trump is in the middle of executing one of the most jaw-dropping pivots in American foreign policy in generations. A 180-degree turn that will force friends and foes to recalibrate in fundamental ways.
Yeah, because the foreign policy of these generations has ended in a failure. That's why you have to pivot. You have to say this is no longer working.
Right,
Okay.
but again, I mean, if you what generations? If you go back to Reagan had very warm relations with Gorbachev, and in fact, Reagan, even in his first term, said he was open to improvement of relations with Soviet leaders, and he made that quip about, but they kept dying on me because we first had Brezhnev, then Andropov, then Chernenko, then Gorbachev said, well, they kept dying on me. But even then, even in those darkest days of the first Reagan term, he still said, "Hey, I want to improve relations with the Soviet Union."
Yeah,
So this is all made up.
because he had the instinct or learned from Nixon. Nixon went to China. Reagan can go to Moscow. Okay,
Right.
he could do it. He could do it.
He could do it. Exactly. He could do it. When ever since the end of World War II, a long parade of American presidents saw first the Soviet Union and then, after a brief and illusory interregnum, its successor, Russia, as a force to be wary of, at the very least. I mean, but even if you say whatever, wary of, Trump didn't say we're not going to be wary of them. He just said, it makes sense to talk and come to agreements on matters of mutual interest. He didn't say, well, we should stop being wary of them. He never said Russia is our friend. Where did he ever say Russia is our friend?
And the whole world doesn't revolve around the conflict in Ukraine. The two largest nuclear powers, it should at least have a phone line to
Right,
talk.
exactly.
Okay? Right, we're not going to agree on Ukraine, but can
Right.
talk about other things. And that's if you look at the readouts from Riyadh, that was a result of the Riyadh meeting. That's what it was all about, George. It
Mhm.
was about reestablishing bilateral relations. That was like 99% of it, everyone.
Exactly. That's exactly right. They as we'll see some later on. There really wasn't any specifics about
Nope.
Ukraine. It was
Nope.
about reestablishing bilateral relations. Mr. Trump gives every appearance of viewing it as a collaborator in future joint ventures.
Okay.
Okay, and he makes clear that the United States is done isolating Mr. Putin for his unprovoked, that's it, get it in, unprovoked aggression against a weaker neighbor and the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people. Again, no mention
And
here.
so why did the Biden administration promote and push Ukraine into a war against against a neighbor that was much more powerful, had a much larger arm. Why? It's left unsaid in this article.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And again, there's no mention. Well, what happened in 2014? What happened to that Minsk Accords? And of course, the Russians like to go back correctly to the illegal coup against Viktor Yanukovych, who had steered Ukraine into a kind of neutral direction. That was he ran on that platform in 2010. He won the election in 2010. Ukraine would revert to being a neutral power. It would not join any military alliances. And he was overthrown.
Yes, and everyone, Zelensky ran on a peace
Right,
platform in
right, right,
2019.
right. Um, yes, peace with Russia and peace in the Donbass. Um, and then instead, Mr. Trump, who has always had a perplexing fondness for Mr. Putin, wants to readmit Russia to the international club and make it one of America's top friends. Well, again, total rubbish. He never even had a perplexing fondness for Mr. Putin. He imposed sanctions after sanctions on Russia during his first term and was determined to stop Nord Stream. Anyway, as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, Russia is not responsible for the war that has devastated his neighbor. Instead, he suggests that Ukraine is to blame for Russia's invasion of it. To listen to Mr. Trump talk with reporters on Tuesday about the conflict was to hear a version of reality that would be unrecognizable on the ground in Ukraine and certainly would never have been heard from any other American president of either party.
Well, isn't that a comment on controlling the narrative? Okay, and, when you shadow ban people, you demonetize people. There are George and I could spend a separate podcast on all the naysayers here,
Right,
but according to the New York Times,
right.
no, that doesn't exist.
They don't exist. They don't go. Who was it? That was this guy called Roger Wicker. Now, Roger Wicker is one of these right-wing Republicans, and he's, I think, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was the guy who I think early on suggested that NATO should bomb Russia. I think he even suggested using maybe nuclear weapons against Russia. And now he was saying, no, I don't think we should talk with Putin. I think we should just put him on trial as a war criminal and execute him. He even said execute him. Well, this is the person you want to represent your country. He's chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I mean, the New York Times. It's not apoplectic about the person like that is the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. No, it's the fact that somebody wants restore normal, peaceful diplomatic relations with a nuclear superpower.
It's really interesting. All these people, they seem to, all of them have a common core belief: killing.
Killing. Right. Right. Exactly. In Mr. Trump's telling Ukrainian leaders were at fault for the war for not agreeing to surrender territory, and therefore he suggested they do not deserve a seat at the table for the peace talks that he had just initiated with Mr. Putin. Quote, you should have never started it, Mr. Trump said, referring to Ukrainian leaders who in fact did not start it. You could have made a deal. Now, the thing of it is that if you go back to Minsk, you go back to Istanbul, the Russians were never asking Ukraine to surrender any territory. Istanbul was all about demilitarization of Ukraine, no foreign forces on the territory of Ukraine, and of course, no NATO membership of Ukraine. All the issues, whether Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk, were all to be negotiated in the future. And including a one-on-one negotiations between Putin and Zelensky.
And if those of you that are regulars, George and I thought it was a really bad deal.
Very much so. Very much so. But that's the thing.
Or a bad deal for Russia, I should say.
Bad deal for Russia, exactly. And then if you go back again to Minsk insisted on the reintegration of Donetsk and Lugansk, contrary to the results of the referendum that had taken place there. The reintegration, but a change in the Ukrainian constitution, so special status for Donetsk and Lugansk. So again, this is a total lie from the New York Times. Oh, they should just simply have said. That um, when I think when Trump says you should never have started it, I think he just means in a more general sense you should have come to some kind of an agreement. I mean
Well, I mean,
that's it.
again, I doubt Trump is aware of this, but George and I, okay, it's not satisfactory, but it is untrue. It's actually true. You never should have started it. Let's go look at what's going on weeks and days before the start of the special military operation. What was going on? The Donbass was being plummeted by missile attacks by the Kiev regime. And you can go, it's public knowledge. They even do it with maps and charts, the number of missiles from the Donbass going into Ukraine and from Ukraine into the Donbass. You could pick your color, red or blue, but one color was really dominant, and it was obvious to George and I at the time,
Right,
is that they're mounting an attack against the Donbass. Okay.
right.
And the Russians obviously were watching very closely. For a change, they weren't asleep at the wheel, and they reacted to it. No, we have to be very, George Marx Laboda, many of all of us think that Russia's reaction to the coup in 2014 was a cardinal error, an
Cardinals.
unpardonable error.
Yeah, exactly. Because it was obvious to us, and we were, I was in New York at the time, but it was obvious. Hey, this is a very big deal. What's going on in Kiev? This is clearly a major push by the NATO powers, a major geopolitical push against Russia by the NATO powers. This is serious stuff. And the Russians should have been absolutely on the ball and done whatever was necessary to bring to an end what was going on in Maidan. Send in their own forces. If the Ukrainian forces, Yanukovych's forces can't do it, then you send in your own special forces. But absolutely, this was a huge event that was taking place.
Again, Trump's usage of words and his syntax and everything leaves much to be desired. But let's again look at this. You should have never started it. Well, they never should have. Did they push back against it
Right.
starting? They again, even in 2000 in 2022, they had shown no agency. It was others calling the shots.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and I have been using the term much to the my own unpopularity for saying it, but Ukraine is not a victim; it's a volunteer.
Right. So,
They've
yeah, that's absolutely right. And you have to keep in mind, Trump is answering questions. When you're answering questions, people are throwing things at you. Usually, as reporters do, they ask these questions. When did you stop beating your wife? Type questions. It's not. You're not in a seminar room. You're not there among academics when you can sit and measure your words. You're doing it spontaneously. And sometimes when you do things spontaneously in response to a hostile questioning, you say things that are not exactly accurate. And yeah, yeah,
they want Trump to step in it.
exactly, and that's the whole point. That's why they ask these questions, because they want him to step in it. So anyway, so this is another article in the Times says Zelensky and Trump trade blows as feud escalates over peace talks. President Trump called Vladimir Zelensky a dictator without elections after the Ukrainian president said Mr. Trump was in a web of disinformation. This was not, as J.D. Vance said, this is not a good way to handle Trump. He doesn't like being told that he's in a web of disinformation.
He does.
He is the president of the United States. You
Yeah,
don't like being talked to like that.
and the hand that feeds you.
Right. Um, and then here says, they're quoting Zelensky says, I would like to have more truth with the Trump team, Mr. Zelensky said in some of the most overt criticism yet of Mr. Trump and his view of the war in Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky, summoning reporters to his presidential office in Kiev, a building still fortified with sandbags, said that the US president was living in a web of disinformation.
Hey, George, now I have a question for you. Is he being fed this by his handlers?
Yes, I think so. I
Well,
probably.
that's a kind of an interesting thing because his handlers work for Trump.
Well, that's a good question. Whether they may still be holdovers from the
Yeah,
Biden era. I
yeah,
mean,
that's
in other
what
words, there hasn't yet been a change
Yeah.
in his handlers team. So you're right. In technically they work for Trump, but I think these are holdovers from the Biden era, and they
And
haven't told Zelensky that the Biden era is no more. You know, you got to have a new set of talking points.
well, I mean, these are like Fiona Hills and the Vindmans. They're just saying, my days here in Kiev are numbered. I could be out in a week. But I'm going to stay with the cause. Blah
Right,
blah blah.
right.
And they just do that. I mean, when I see this, um, we haven't seen any agency at all for years coming out of Kiev. All of a sudden, it appears. It
Right.
doesn't make any sense to me.
No, I think that he was very poorly advised. Normally, he is quite shrewd in the way he does his public relations. Clearly, he was very poorly advised. Now, you'd have to think that either Rubio or whoever, or someone in the National Security Council, basically, it's still 1 month in, and they haven't really got all their ducks in a row. So they've got people in place in Kiev who are the wrong people, or they may be just holdovers from the Biden era. But he really stepped in it this time, because whoever told him to talk like that should have known you don't talk about Trump in that way. Anyone who has done that, Trump is going to come back at you in a really nasty way. And sure enough, Trump did.
Yeah, look, I
Here,
mean, again, we know a lot about this man. He doesn't usually pick fights, but when you pick a fight with him,
exactly. He's a
he
counterpuncher.
brings a gun to a knife fight. Okay.
Exactly. He doesn't pick fights, but he's a very good counterpuncher. And so here it is. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian. So that's already and he puts in his insult, modestly. It's the way he talks about, say, Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro, a talentless hack. So a modestly successful comedian, Vladimir Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the US and Trump, will never be able to settle. So everything here is of course correct, because you can't wage this war without the United States. I mean that's a given. Now, everyone then immediately does the fact check about the numbers. Oh, there's 350 billion, and who knows? I mean,
Who
there's
knows?
been
Who
no
cares?
audit. There's been no audit.
I agree. Okay. I mean, everybody bandies about numbers, but because Congress, Senate, and the House did not mandate an audit on the
Right,
aid, it
right,
was suggested, it was brought to the floor
right.
in both houses, and they said, nah, we don't need an audit. Okay. Well, Elon Musk is going to give us a very thorough audit. Watch everybody. It's in the works.
He's the sort of the government proctologist. Not, not a nice thing to be, or not a nice thing to be a victim of.
Yeah.
Um, um, and he was like, we'll never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization in that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half the money we sent him is missing. He did say that. So, I don't know where something was it. Something like, I don't know, 100 billion. Where
Yeah,
it went.
but is it missing in your bank account? It's missing, but I know where it is.
Yes, exactly. Um, he refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successful in negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues.
Yeah,
Now,
well,
look,
only Trump can write Trump in capital letters. Yes.
Well, you have to keep in mind this is a person who makes money just on his
Yeah.
name. On
Yeah. Yeah.
buildings put that the logo Trump building, even though it has absolutely nothing to do with Trump, just
Well,
because
I saw,
that adds to the value of a building.
I thought it was this. I think it was this morning. I had a terrible fever this morning, so maybe I'm not remembering correctly. But in a sentence, answer because he meets the media every day. It seems like he says Trump says I have all the Trump cards, and I just thought it's very rare that someone would use their name like that, but he did. It was at least I remember that way.
Right.
But yeah, I look. I mean on balance and intention, this is all of it's fair. It's
Right.
all okay.
Right.
I would quibble maybe with every single sentence, but the thrust of it is absolutely correct.
Well, exactly. And the point is that this is an obvious point, very, very obvious to say Zelensky has been a terrible leader. That's it. You just, it's a common sense. What Trump does here, he's not an intellectual. He doesn't study history. He doesn't read books. He doesn't. I mean, he's just somebody who very much goes by instinct, and his instincts are pretty good. Which I think a lot of people go by instinct and they're very bad at it. His instincts are actually pretty good. He has an instinct that tells him Zelensky is a terrible leader, that he should have settled this war long ago. It should never have happened. And so here we are. And now you're still complaining when somebody says, I'm going to go and settle this war. Now we can leave aside for another day whether Trump will succeed in the project. I mean, that's a much more difficult. But in principle, that project is a worthy one and should be pursued.
And also, there's an added layer or different, an additional dimension in all of this that usually or almost never comes up. Is that Trump doesn't want to be played. I think he's acutely aware of that.
Right.
So, I mean, and people will criticize Trump and agree with me with him about what I'm about to say. But Trump identifies himself as America. He is America.
That's right.
Okay. I mean, he's not the chief executive. He's not the elected official. No, I am. The French monarchs. I am France.
That's
Okay.
right.
So I think Trump feels that way.
L'état c'est moi. Yeah, that's what Louis XIV said. Yes. No, I think so. And in some ways, I mean, he has explicitly kind of wants to go back to the old America. When you're thinking about an America, the America of John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart and Henry Ford, and this is kind of the sort of America that people used to think about. The sort of that big, strong, commanding presence, not the sort of the wimpy, apologetic America of Obama and Biden. And so, but this became very interesting. This is from the Financial Times. They're having difficulties coming up with this the statement from the G7 about Ukraine, and of course, there's a UN General Assembly resolution that that supposedly is going to be issued on February the 24th. So that's in just a few days' time. Which again is a question whether what will be the formulation of that General Assembly resolution. But here's the Financial Times says U.S. objects to phrase Russian aggression in G7 statement on Ukraine. Trump administration splits with allies on holding Moscow responsible for war. And then here, the U.S. is opposed to calling Russia the aggressor in a G7 statement on the third anniversary of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, threatening to derail a traditional show of unity. Well, there isn't a unity. I mean, I think we're agreed on that as things stand, on Ukraine at least, there's no unity. Ukrainian President Zelensky's participation at it's going to be a virtual summit on Monday, has also not yet been agreed. Officials said, while Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's office announced she would not participate. This is actually very funny. Because she wants to keep in with Trump, but she also wants to keep in with the Ursula von der Leyen and the European establishment. So she said, I think that, oh, well, I've got a prior engagement with the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah, I'm taking a personal day. Okay.
Exactly. It's just, yeah, that's right. Do not want this.
Yeah, George is absolutely right in pointing this out because this is where it's the separation of the corn from
The wheat from the chaff.
the wheat from the chaff. This is, and it's happening right now. Okay, apparently she's one of the weaker ones.
Yes.
Okay.
The dispute over the planned G7 statement comes after Trump shocked Kiev and its European allies by contacting Russian President Vladimir Putin and authorizing bilateral talks that are aimed at ending the war in Ukraine.
If that's a bad thing.
Well, yeah, first of all, it's a bad thing. And shocked, he said he was going to do it. I mean, over and over again throughout the campaign, he said he was going to do it.
And remember a week before, I said he was asked, "Have you talked to Putin?" He said, "I'm not going to answer that."
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone was anticipating the call, and then when it happens, oh, nobody expected it.
And he also said he was going. He said he was going to talk to Zelensky. He did talk to Zelensky after he put the phone down with Putin. He called Zelensky. So, he did exactly what he said. He was going to talk to both sides. Trump has flattered Putin, agreed to many of his demands regarding the war. What does he agree to? I mean, agreed to many of his demands regarding the war and showed a willingness to quickly normalize Washington's relations with Moscow. Again, you think, okay, well, these are all good things, normalizing relations. Imagine you're stepping back from what it was under Biden when we were talking about the possibility of a war between NATO and Russia. I mean, that was the talk during the Biden years. I mean, it's not a good thing that all that's being put on the back burner.
Well, I suppose it's knowable at some point, and I'm sure many around Trump saying, but there's going to be a pretty sharp reaction, Mr. President. He's going to say, well, from whom? Right. The Europeans, G7, and he's going to say,
right.
So what?
So what exactly?
That's probably what he said.
Exactly.
So what?
Because he looks
I was elected to end this thing.
That's right. It's so funny also when you say the G7. So you've got Governor Trudeau. I mean, he now just always refers to him as Governor Trudeau. You've got Macron and
like Gauleiter, the European Gauleiter, von der Leyen.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And then you got Sergeant Schultz. And you got Maloney. I mean, I don't think he takes so very seriously. You got Keir Starmer. He probably doesn't.
Which he rightfully hates. Okay.
He rightfully hates him. He didn't appreciate Keir Starmer helping Kamala Harris during the campaign. We talked about it. We did a podcast about it. I'm sure Trump is not going to forget that.
Who came up with? I asked it during that podcast. Who came up with that idea? And they were so public about. There's only a few slots left. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, incompetence. Wow.
Well, a total idiot. Again, that's what I mean. It's because this is a person who has no instincts. He has absolutely no instinctual feel for politics and does things that are really dumb. You don't want to ever interfere in another country's election, because if you get the wrong result, you're going to pay the price.
Yeah, because what has happened, the neoliberal model, the way it has evolved, is that it always focuses in on policy. Everything's policy. These people have no idea what politics is. They don't. Benjamin Netanyahu, as evil as this guy is a political animal to his core. Okay. He knows exactly what he's doing. Right. Trump is a good politician. Right. He's got really good instincts. Putin, the same way. Right. Xi, what I can tell, the same way. Right. Even MBS, I would say, has good instincts here. But nobody in the West does. Nobody in Europe does.
No. And then he says, U.S. envoys are objecting to the phrase Russian aggression and similar words that have been used by G7 leaders since 2022 to describe the war in Ukraine. the world's leading economies have traditionally issued a statement of support for Ukraine on February the 24th, the day on which Russia's full-scale invasion started 3 years ago. And then here we have an official brief. We are adamant that there must be a distinction made between Russia and Ukraine. They are not the same. This is an official, an anonymous official.
Okay, well, then don't sign it.
That, yeah, that's
It's virtual. You don't have to get back on an airplane. Don't even show up. Don't show up if you don't like it. Don't show up.
right, right.
You
Yeah,
think you'll be missed? You think you'll be missed?
it's a very interesting question as to who will show up. Because on Monday, that's the day after the German election. Chances are Scholz will be humiliated in the election. I mean, does he want to show his face, after a terrible drubbing?
Can you imagine? Well, he's definitely he's got the boot. Okay, I mean, so no, oh, that is just this guy. Just his autobiography is how I accepted humiliation.
Right,
Okay,
that's
and
right.
so he's going to be attending a meeting when he's just absolutely crushed and humiliated by the election. So, Sergeant Schultz, what do you think about all of this? I mean, who cares about his opinion?
Can you imagine if Sergeant Schultz then issues even a cautious kind of criticism of Trump's approach when what Trump is going to immediately send out a truth? But Sergeant Schultz, well, he won't call it a chancellor that who is absolutely hated by all Germans and who won't have a job in the very near future, has always said ridiculous things, and he has allowed himself to be used as a doormat by the sleepy Joe Biden. You can actually even see the Biden truth that would come out if Schultz issues any kind of criticism of Trump. Anyway, so then he says, the change in US language on Russia marks a contrast with last year when the country's aggression was mentioned five times in the G7 leaders' statement.
Okay, everybody. This is the Financial Times, right?
Yeah.
I have a truth to impart here. The world doesn't care what the G7 says.
I don't think so.
They don't care. It's a club. When it was when Russia was disinvited from the G8, I was happy. Okay.
Right.
And then the thought of Russia going back in horrifies me
Right.
because these are the former colonial powers with their neoliberal ideology that it has upped its game when it comes to colonizing and having an imperial desire on the resources of the global South. These are the bad guys. These are the bad guys, okay?
Right.
So
Right.
do you think, wake up, Mr. Prime Minister in India, the G7 statement is out.
That's quite right. The funny thing is also
You think Lula cares?
no, the funny thing is, of course, is that most of the members of the G7, they're kind of interchangeable. First of all, I don't even know why Canada, I mean, it's supposed to be the biggest economies in the world. I mean, when did Canada become one of the biggest economies in the world? But they're essentially interchangeable because they're all members of the NATO club or the US military club. And so therefore, it says, why do you need these people? And they basically all speak with one voice. It's the same thing about, well, let's expand the membership, the permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Oh, let's bring in Germany and Japan. And Russia says, why? Why do we need Germany and Japan? They're just going to, say the same things that Britain, France, and the United States do. We don't need their voices. Their voices are already at the United Nations.
One of the easy reforms of the Security Council, the easiest one, is that Europe gets one representative, and it's up to the Europeans to figure out who's going to be the country of that year or that cycle.
Right.
Let you worry about it, okay? No, this is absurd. Japan and Germany.
Oh, we want Germany and Japan. No, veto. So,
France and Britain should have their veto rescinded.
right. Yeah.
I think Russia, China, India, Brazil, these are the countries that should be the permanent members now.
It is very funny because it was just because it was established there. It was 1945. they were the victors of World War II, and it's really just an accident of history that Britain and France have this enormous weight in the world, because they were the victors in 1945. France is even more dubious. I mean, France didn't even win the war, but was thanks to the generosity of the Americans and the British, it was elevated to the status of a great power.
A quirk.
And then, meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron said on Thursday that he would meet Trump in Washington in the coming days to discuss Ukraine, adding he would tell U.S. President to avoid being weak with Putin. How can you be credible in China if you are weak in front of Putin? That is lame. That is lame. I wouldn't try that one with Trump. I mean, I think that's really lame. I think that's not going to go down well in your meeting. And then I think Starmer is also coming to Washington next week.
Yeah, well, I think he's going to be made to wait. I think there's a Ramada Inn across the street from. Oh no, it's the International House of Pancakes. So he'll wait. I hope.
Macron also said Zelensky had been legitimately elected. It's so dumb. First of all, there was a coup against the legitimate president. Then the election that's 6 years ago. The point is, we're not even going to argue about what happened 6 years ago. The point is, there's no election now. He should have been running for election a year ago, or whenever his term of office expired. I think it was May of last year. So, I mean, he says he's legitimately elected. Well, Ukraine is not a democracy. Leave aside everything else. Has been the persecution of the media, the persecution of the Orthodox Church, and everything else. It's clearly not a democracy. Just because they keep repeating this like a mantra. I mean, Zelensky is dubbing Poroshenko a traitor. He says he's a traitor. He's frozen all his assets. I mean, that's the leader of the opposition. He's being dubbed a traitor. His assets are frozen. They just say, "Oh, Ukraine is a model democracy." And all the evidence, you can just see the evidence, and they go, "Oh, no, it's a model democracy."
There's no opposition political party.
There's no opposition political party at all. There's no opposition media.
Well, we'll see if there's going to be any media at all with the USAID, the money lost.
Right. And then it says Meloni's office said she would not join the G7 call on Monday because of a prior commitment to meet the president of the United Arab Emirates. Who'd have thunk that the president of the United Arab Emirates holds such a huge standing in the world that he comes before any virtual
I'm
call?
sorry, I may be expressing my ignorance here, but does the United Arab Emirates have a president?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, I'm a little puzzled about that one. Maybe
it's like a near.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It sounded kind of jarring to me too. And that Italy's foreign minister would participate instead. And here's the Times: U.S. objects to calling Russia aggressor in G7 statement on invasion. The American opposition to a draft of a Group of Seven statement marking the third anniversary of Russia's attack on Ukraine comes after President Trump blamed Kiev for starting the war. The United States is opposing calling Russia the aggressor in the war with Ukraine in the Group of Seven statement being drafted to mark the third anniversary. So the American objections to the statement come, and so on. And then one senior official from a Group of Seven countries said that Canada had said, which is the 51st state of the United States, Canada had circulated the first draft of the statement to the other 6 member countries. That version, the official said, used language that retained a pro-Ukraine tone the group of allies adopted after February 22. The US side went through the first draft this week and removed all references that could be interpreted as being pro-Ukraine. The result, the official added, was a neutral draft statement that made no reference to Russia as the aggressor in the conflict, nor to Ukraine as the victim of the invasion. And then And then just touchingly, the New York Times uses this picture as an illustration of this horror being inflicted by the Trump administration. This picture of President Biden and Mr. Zelensky at the G7 summit in Italy last year. And there they are, they're putting their arms
Yeah,
around
what,
one another.
what my complaint about this picture is that I'd like to see the seconds before and the seconds after, because I'm pretty sure Zelensky picked his pocket. Pretty sure.
Or whether, Biden needed a bathroom break immediately after.
Yeah. Let me go. Jill's got some Pampers. Let's go this way. Okay.
Exactly, exactly. Um, and then Canada began the drafting process by adhering to expressions like slump, and then, but the Trump administration officials indicated they wanted something different from and shorter. What was shorter is good, shorter than the statement issued under President Biden, and sought to ensure it did not interfere or block the negotiations now underway with Russia.
Well, I mean, George, I just really don't see what the big uproar is here. The G7 is run by the US.
Hmm.
NATO is run by
Right.
the US.
Yeah.
There's this pretense that, we sit around a table, we're all equals,
Right.
nonsense. Okay.
Right.
Trump is head of the table.
That's right.
No, Trump is not head of the table. It is his table.
It is stable. Yeah. And
Okay.
as
NATO, they're not sitting around, kumbaya.
right.
No, Trump owns NATO. It's
Right.
his alliance.
That's right. And as we
Now,
like to, yeah,
Maloney, if you don't like it, go find your own alliance,
that's right.
okay? Because this is not a club of
No,
equals. It was
no,
never designed that way.
no, that's exactly right. And we like to always remind people of that NATO summit in 2017 when there was a group of these NATO leaders walking, and Trump was in the second row and sort of picked up the president of Montenegro, pushed him aside, walked ahead of the procession, and then kind of straightened his jacket after shoving aside the president of Montenegro. Exactly. He's not just one of the members of the procession. No, he's leading the procession.
No, and what is so disingenuous and so dishonest is that people like Obama and Biden like to play the role
Right.
of, we're all equal, there's equality here. That's all, that was all fake. Okay.
Right.
It was trying to give legitimacy
Right.
to the institution of NATO and of the G7. This was all cosplay.
Right.
Trump comes in and he doesn't do that. That's
No,
not his style.
no,
Okay.
no. That's right. That's right. So here, and then Marco Rubio gave an interview with Catherine Herridge. God, it was a
Oh,
good
the plot
journalist.
thickens.
That's right. For X, which itself is interesting. How I mean, before he did an interview with Megyn Kelly, who has her own show. So it's an interesting, like whom he is now selecting as his interlocutors. But anyway, here he gives this question: in your meetings, did the Russian foreign minister make clear that there can be no end to the war if Ukraine joins NATO? And then Rubio says, well, there was no discussion about details. Now the Russians have their own readout of what happened, but I can tell you we did not negotiate any fine points about the deal. The course of the conversation was as follows. Number one, we have to some level of regularization of our diplomatic missions because we have to be able to communicate with them given the nature of our two countries and the importance we have in the world. Second is we could cooperate on geopolitically. I mean, there are items of the world where I think we have a common interest. I'm not sure the Russians are fans of the Iranian regime having nuclear weapons, as an example. And and then, but we can't work on these things. We're going to disagree on a lot, but we can't work on the things we might potentially agree on or deconflict on things that could lead to dangerous confrontations as long as this Ukraine impediment stands in the way. And so really, as much as anything else, this meeting was, are you interested in even talking about ending the war? If you are, then let's create a process where we can begin to engage at a technical level, and that process will now at some point be set up and begin. So that's kind of more or less what he said in the news conference afterwards, along with Mike Waltz. And then question, Ukraine was not at the talks. Are you consulting with President Zelensky about his red lines? He says, well, just in the last week, okay, President Zelensky has met with the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and there was meetings with the Vice President in Munich. Our special envoy is there meeting with him, so we talked to the Ukrainians throughout this process, and we explained to them very clearly what our intentions were in terms of pursuing this. In fact, the President of the United States spoke to Zelensky right after he hung up with Putin. I was in the office of both phone calls, so to say we haven't consulted with them is not accurate. It's not true. But you just have to sense his body language. Rubio is not comfortable. This is not. Rubio has always been a neocon, but he now knows exactly what is being asked of him. And therefore he has to be. Now President Trump is setting policy. It's also not true that we haven't consulted our allies in Europe. I personally spoke to the 5 foreign ministers right after my meeting, and so on. And then he goes on. Did the U.S. delegation make clear to the Russians that there are no guarantees about the retention of territory they have annexed from Ukraine? And it says we didn't engage in any specifics about territory because that wasn't the purpose of the meeting. The purpose of the meeting was to determine whether there was a real interest in discussing peace or not. If there is, then it's a process that can begin. And I also think it's silly to say, well, the Ukrainians are going to be cut out or the Europeans are going to be cut out. You can't find a stop to the war unless both sides and their views are represented. They both have to agree to it. Like Russia can't agree to a ceasefire or an end to the hostilities if the Ukrainians don't agree to it, has to, and so on. And then he goes, so what's the signal, Secretary Rubio, that the Russians are serious about peace? Always good, get the right framing of the question. Are the Russians serious about peace? Well, that signal, I can't answer whether they're serious about peace or not yet. They will have to be determined by the attitude they take moving forward. The only thing we agreed upon is that we're going to talk about peace. What they offer, what they're willing to concede to, what they're willing to consider will determine whether they're serious about peace or not. We're just not at that stage yet. And then when President Trump posted that President Zelensky is a dictator without elections, what are you thinking? And then, well, I think President Trump is very upset at President Zelensky and some, and rightfully so. Look, number one, Joe Biden had frustrations with Zelensky. People shouldn't forget it. There are newspaper articles out there about how he cursed at him in a phone call because Zelensky, instead of saying thank you for all your help, is immediately out there messaging what we're not doing or what he's not getting. So, Rubio must have had this answer in mind because it's amazing how he came up with this. Well, yeah. Well, what about Biden? I mean, it's not something he could have just thought of on the spot. I think the second thing is, frankly, I was personally very upset because we had a conversation with President Zelensky, the Vice President, and I, and we discussed this issue about the mineral rights. And we explained to them, look, we want to be in a joint venture with you, not because we're trying to steal from your country, but because we think that's actually a security guarantee. If we're your partner in an important economic endeavor, we get to get paid back some of the money the taxpayers have given, close to 200 billion. And it also, now we have a vested interest in the security of Ukraine. And he said, sure, we want to do this deal. It makes all the sense in the world. The only thing is I need to run it through my legislative process. They have to approve it. I read 2 days later that Zelensky is out there saying, I rejected the deal. I told them no way, that we're not doing it. Well, that's not what happened in that meeting. So you start to get upset by somebody. We're trying to help these guys. Well,
Yeah,
one
but
thing.
I have to repeat my question. Is somebody telling Zelensky not to sign this? I mean, this whole thing is preposterous on its face. But anyway, I mean, why did he change? Did he suddenly grow a pair and say, "No, I'm the president of Ukraine," or did he say, "No, push back, push back"?
Right. No, that's right. Also, this deal. I mean, we don't know exactly what's in the deal because they're talking about these rare earths, but the deal may be much more extensive than that. They might be talking about oil and gas, infrastructure, construction. There might be all sorts of projects that the Americans want 50% of. But that's pretty standard. That's what Americans do when they sign these deals in the Gulf states. They get 50%. I mean, anything you do a deal in Saudi Arabia, you're going to build oil wells, you get 50%. The Saudis get 50% or whatever. So it's actually not a bad deal from Ukraine's perspective. I mean, the idea that they're stealing anything. Well, the Americans are putting up the capital. I mean, Ukraine doesn't have the capital. Americans put up the capital, but they're saying Ukraine will take 50% and we take 50%.
Yeah, but again, they're putting the horse ahead of the cart. I mean, it's not as if people weren't aware of the rare earths that are there. It's been known for a very long time. And as they've already been sold as concessions. Everybody, do you know who one of the biggest owners is? Burisma. Okay.
Right, right. But
Okay, there's a lot more layers to this than either side in the media is explaining. I mean, this is a pretty complicated thing. Okay, you're going to have to the Ukrainian state is going to have to nationalize these again. Okay,
right.
that looks like. But then again, Ukraine's economy is run on an oligarchic system. Are you going to start an oligarch war over this? I mean, it's a lot more complicated.
It's that's right. But I do think that since we haven't actually seen the agreement, I do think it goes beyond the rare earths, because if you just say the rare earths, then that's very tricky, because we don't know exactly how much in terms of rare earths there are. It's very tricky to get them out. It's a very expensive undertaking. What we can say is that I don't think Scott Bessent, who's a billionaire, Trump, who's also a billionaire, I doubt whether they're going to sign a stupid deal. I mean, they're not going to sign a deal unless they can think they're going to make some money on it. I mean, these are
But
all businessmen.
I'm not impressed. Okay, I think this is part of the justification of making of presenting the deal. We get something out of see what we get
Right.
out,
No, I think
and I think that's sweeten the pot.
no,
That's what.
I agree. I know, I agree. But again, I just think that there's probably more to it than these rare earths, because I think that by itself is just not, there's not enough. That's a huge amount of investment, probably for not huge returns. Because there's rare earths in a lot of parts of the world, and no one gets them out because it's very difficult and it's a very complicated undertaking.
And depending on who's estimating, I've seen 71% of these alleged rare earths are already in Russian control.
Yeah, well, so I think there's probably a lot more in that deal, like oil and gas concessions, ports, infrastructure. In other words, any future construction, they want 50% of. I think that's probably in the agreement. But again, no one has actually seen that agreement that Scott Bessent presented him with. Um, One of the points the president made in his messaging is that it's not that we don't care about Ukraine, but that Ukraine is on another continent. It doesn't directly impact the daily lives of Americans. We care about it because it has implications for our allies and ultimately the world. There should be some level of gratitude about this. And when you don't see it, you see him out there accusing the president of living in a world of disinformation. That's very counterproductive. And I don't need to explain to you or anybody else, President Trump is not the kind of person that's going to sit there and take it. He's very transparent. He's going to tell you exactly how he feels. And he sent a message that he's not going to get gamed here. He's willing to work on peace because he cares about Ukraine. And he hopes Zelensky will be a partner in that and not someone who's out there putting the sort of counter messaging to try to hustle us in that regard. That's not going to be productive here. But I think your point is an interesting one. Who's running him? I think that what's going to happen in the next week or so is they're going to put a different team around Zelensky and get Zelensky to get on the Trump wavelength, because they're saying, hey, everything you're saying now is antagonizing Trump. They've got to get somebody else in there, because this team is clearly failing him.
Well, George, I mean, I want to be very cautious here. but all afternoon on these Telegram channels that I've been observing. Um, Apparently, someone in the Trump orbit has suggested that Zelensky, it's time to go. Okay, now that's Telegram, everybody.
Right.
Okay, there's a lot of people, a lot of agendas
Right.
there, but it's kind of interesting. I'm just going to leave it there.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
it in social media, it's being talked about. Okay, now
Yeah.
just because it's being talked about doesn't mean it's true.
Exactly. No, that's right. I'm
Yeah,
skeptical of
I
that.
just want to
But
throw
anyway,
it out.
no, that's fine. That's fine. Anyway, so this, and then later in the day, there was a news conference, a big news conference. There was Stephen Miller, Kevin Hassett, and Mike Waltz, the national security advisor. It was a long news conference. We don't have to go through that, but except the Ukraine part. And then here we have a question. After the president's post on Truth Social yesterday, need to know who does he think is more responsible for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin or Zelensky? Always get that question. Mr. Waltz, well, look, his goal, Peter, is to bring this war to an end, period. And there has been ongoing fighting on both sides. World War One style trench warfare. And his frustration with President Zelensky is that you've heard is multifold. One, there needs to be a deep appreciation for what American people, what the American taxpayer, and what President Trump did in his first term, and that we've done and what we've done since. So some of the rhetoric coming out of Kiev, frankly, and insults to President Trump were unacceptable, number one. Number two, our own Secretary of Treasury personally made the trip to offer the Ukrainians what can only be described as a historic opportunity. That is for America to co-invest with Ukraine in their minerals, in their resources, truly grow the pie. So again, they're also again talking about that. And then, so case in point, there's a foundry that processes aluminum in Ukraine. It's been damaged. It's not its current capacity. If that is restored, it would account for America's entire imports of aluminum for an entire year. That's one foundry. There are tremendous resources there. Not only is that long-term security for Ukraine, not only do we help them grow the pie with investments, but we do have an obligation to the American taxpayer in helping them recoup the hundreds of billions that have occurred. Notice, of course, he hasn't answered the question. He's just talking. He's just got his particular talking points, but it's similar to what Rubio also said.
Yeah, it's the cost of doing business when you work for Trump.
That's right. And then we have, so rather than enter into some constructive conversations about what the deal should be going forward, we got a lot of rhetoric in the media that was incredibly unfortunate. And I could just tell you, Peter, I don't know who Peter is. Maybe it's Peter Ducey. I don't
I think
know.
it's Peter Doocy, yeah.
Yeah. As a veteran, as somebody who's been in combat, this war is horrific. And I think we've lost sight of that, of the literally thousands of people that are dying a day, families that are going without the next generation. And I find it kind of, frankly ridiculous. So many people in Washington that were just demanding, pounding the table for a ceasefire in Gaza are suddenly aghast that the president would demand one on both sides, and both sides come to the table when it comes to Ukraine, a war that has been arguably far greater in scope and scale and far more dangerous in terms of global escalation to U.S. security. Well, I think we're kind of consistent. We want ceasefire in both. I mean, I'm not quite sure. I mean, you just basically both need to come to an end, like yesterday.
Yeah, but I mean, what we're getting here, these are best efforts. I give them kudos for that. But everybody, what's really happening here? It's trying to rationalize a policy shift that is absolutely necessary. And that's why they're not coming out, batting like Trump does.
Right,
Okay. They're trying to negotiate a narrative. Okay. Step by step. Okay. We can talk about minerals. We'll talk about
right,
minerals.
right,
Okay.
right,
That's their segue.
right,
Start changing this narrative.
right, right. No, 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 no. That's right. That's right. That's why Zelensky's response was somewhat surprising, because when he offered his so-called victory plan, he brought that forward, that enticing, hey, come and invest. There's money to be had here. And then we had Lindsey Graham saying we can make trillions in Ukraine precisely in order to get Trump excited. So that's why it's very odd for Zelensky then to walk it back. I mean, just say, hey, yeah, sure, sign a deal. Again, if the terms of that, leave aside whether there's anything there to be mined or not, but the terms of it, 50%, that's a good deal. That's as good a deal as America ever offers anybody. The Serbs, they with their lithium mine, they're only getting 3%. So that's a measure of what the Serbs get when they sign away their lithium riches. Ukraine's getting 50%. So that's again, it seems like Zelensky is not getting good advice.
Well,
The people around him are not giving him shrewd advice as to how to proceed.
I wouldn't put it past Trump is that because we have no idea what the who will recognize what territorial
Right,
bound.
right,
Yeah, we don't know, and we may find ourselves in a Baltic state a paradigm where the United States and I think the rest of the Western world never recognized the Baltic states as being part of the Soviet Union. It was just as if we're just going to we're going to ignore that reality and we'll say we don't recognize
right,
it. Now, that had its advantages, okay, because then you take the problem off the table, okay?
right,
We're not going to argue about it, okay?
right.
It seems to me that you can say that's Ukrainian land or it's Russian land, but somebody like Trump is going to say, well, what about just I'll partner with you. Let's get this stuff out of the ground.
Right,
I
right.
mean,
No, that's right.
that's what's more important to
Right,
these people,
right.
okay? You guys can squabble. It's a Ukrainian or Russian. It's fine, okay? Let's start digging.
No, I agree. I mean, that's absolutely that's right. And since they did talk in that in Riyadh about future economic opportunities, then I was to say, yeah, hey, there's some rare earths here. You want to sink a little bit of capital in there? Sure, we'll do it.
And
Yeah,
and that would go along with what Trump wants to do is to enhance the bilateral relationship with Russia. I
right,
mean,
exactly.
we can't do it over virtue signaling because that doesn't work. Maybe we can do it by getting rich together, huh?
Music to Trump's ears, yeah. Um, and yeah, so then it goes on. My question is for Mike Waltz. Can you give us a readout of Kellogg's meeting with Zelensky that just wrapped up? And in particular, Zelensky publicly rejected this deal about rare earth minerals. Where does that stand? Mr. Waltz, well, we're going to continue to have. He needs to come back to the table. We're going to continue to have discussions about where that deal is going. Again, we have an obligation to the taxpayer. I think this is an opportunity. The president thinks this is an opportunity for Ukraine going forward. There can be, in my view, nothing better for Ukraine's future and for their security than to have the United States invested in their prosperity long term. And then a key piece of this has also been security guarantees.
It's very interesting, George. What I read into I think this rare earth thing is just, it's an outlier. I simply do not take it seriously. But what I do take seriously is the recent slides you've given it. They're not talking about NATO membership anymore. They're talking about minerals. Okay.
That's right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Messaging management.
Right. No, I think that's
Making
right.
people talk about something else.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Economic opportunities, no question. Yeah. Look, the reality is we're talking about here is it in Ukraine's interest? Is it in Europe's interest? It certainly isn't in Russia's interest or in the American people's interest for this war to grind on forever and ever and ever. But this in itself is it's very, very different. This talk, I mean, to us, it may sound like common sense, but no one is saying that in Europe. I mean, all they're saying in Europe, I mean, every time they come to a microphone is, stand with Ukraine. You're either on the side of freedom or you're on the side of authoritarianism. You're either surrendering to Putin or you're fighting for an independent and free Ukraine. I mean, that's their completely ridiculous, hysterical
Yeah, but George,
rhetoric.
but that kind of messaging only has any kind of import if the U.S. signs off on it. The
Right.
U.S. doesn't sign off on it. It's just like,
I
why is
agree.
that Dutch guy yelling in the forest? Okay, is he
Yeah.
yelling at some guy in Germany? Because he's
Right.
yelling at somebody in Poland. Okay,
Right.
it's noise. It's
That's right.
simply noise.
That's right. That's right. Um, and then, so a key part of his conversation was helping President Zelensky understand this war needs to come to an end. This kind of an open-ended mantra that we've had under the Biden administration, that's over. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time accepting that.
Well said.
Yes. And then the other piece is there's been discussions from Prime Minister Starmer and also President Macron about a European-led security guarantees. We welcome that. We've been asking Europe to step up and secure its own prosperity, safety, and security. So we certainly welcome that. Well, Russians have already said we're not going to accept British and French peacekeepers. That was explicitly said. So I think it's going to be hard to see how that can be brought to a to fruition, because the Americans have said we're not going in, and it's not going to be under NATO auspices. So don't even think about Article 5. And that this is a project that doesn't look like it's it's going to come to fruition.
Yeah, go nuts, guys. Just
All
go
right.
nuts.
And we certainly welcome more European assistance. As I told my counterparts, come to the table with more if you want a bigger seat at the table. In other words, cough up more money into the kitty, which is always there. Um, and then the question, and has Russia pushed for sanctions in your talks with them? And have you consulted with international partners and allies about potentially rolling back sanctions in these negotiations to end the war? And said, well, those talks with our Russian counterparts, both with my counterpart, the national security advisor, and blah, blah, with Foreign Minister Lavrov, it really was quite broad, focused on what's the goals of our broader relationship, but very clear that the fighting has to stop to get any of these brighter goals.
Hey, another non-answer. Keep going,
Exactly,
Joe.
a non-answer to the question. And as a first step, we're just going to do some common sense things like restore the ability of both of our embassies to function. And again, this was common sense. In foreign policy world, they call it shuttle diplomacy. We have to talk to both sides in order to get to both sides of the table. And both sides have said only President Trump could do that. And then the president has called Zelensky a dictator. Does he view Putin as a dictator? And does he want Zelensky out of power? I know he's called for elections. And then thirdly, the head of the defense committee in Ukraine's parliament just has claimed that the US has stopped selling weapons to Ukraine. Is that true? And then Waltz, well, most of our weapons that have gone to Ukraine have been part of a drawdown authority where we've literally taken them out of stocks and then eventually, through appropriation, started buying them again to refill our stocks. And then I'll let you know, just state that there's been a lag in a lot of that process. So many of our stocks, as we look at our operations around the world, are becoming more depleted.
Yeah, but he's only talking about American needs. He's not talking about Ukrainian. It's very
No, that's
interesting.
right. Yeah. That's one of the reasons many people have a lot of concern about where does this end? How much is it going to take? How many lives will be lost? How much will we spend? As a member of Congress, we repeatedly asked the Biden administration those questions, and we never got a satisfactory answer. And again, I mean, we said this earlier, but it bears repeating that all this talk about, oh, Trump is completely misstating how much America has given. Nobody knows. Nobody has done any kind of an audit how much has gone to Ukraine. None. I mean, well, the drawdown authority, or maybe, this was we sold this or whatever. No, nobody knows this. So someone, oh no, it was exactly 112 billion.
I
No,
can,
I
I
think we
can,
got an exact number. It was 112 billion.
I can just imagine Zelensky saying, "Who's got the ledger? You had it yesterday.
Right.
We're keeping track of everything here. Who's got the ledger? All right, we're gonna have to ask around about that. Okay, but I know there's a ledger somewhere.
Right,
Okay.
right. I remember, was it Senator Rand Paul who I think at one point tried to drop some kind of a resolution that henceforth the Biden administration is going to come in with an audit to tell us where the money has gone, and this was voted down. The
Yes,
Senate
and
voted it down.
there was the same resolution in the House, and it was
Right.
voted down.
Voted down, yeah. And then, look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelensky. The fact that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered, I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly. But President Trump, as we made clear to our Russian counterparts, and I want to make that clear today, he's focused on stopping the fighting and moving forward. And we could argue all day long about what's happened in the past.
Well, that's such a typical throwaway. That was a
uh,
long time ago.
That's right. That's right. And then the question, do you still feel now, do you still feel that way now, or do you share the president's assessment as he says Ukraine is to blame for the start of the war? Mr. Waltz, well, it shouldn't surprise you that I share the president's assessment on all kinds of issues. Yeah, I mean, you work for him, you share his assessment. What I wrote as a member of Congress was as a former member of Congress. So that was then. This is now. I was
Well,
then
at least
a congressman.
that's some honesty there.
Very honest. I thought very exactly. I now speak on behalf of the president. And then look, what I share the president's assessment on is that the war has to end, and what comes with that, what comes with that should be at some point elections. What comes with that should be peace. What comes with that is prosperity that we've just offered in this natural resources and economic partnership agreement, an end to the killing and European security and security for the world. The president is not only determined to do that in Europe, he is determined to do it in the Middle East. So
So what we're
that's
getting from this here is that economic prosperity and investment, that is in lieu of NATO and security guarantees from the United States. Now, the
right,
Europeans, they can buffoon themselves and beclown
right,
themselves all they want, but they
right,
don't have any of that capacity. Only the United States has that capacity,
yeah,
okay?
yeah, yeah. No, that's right. Um, and um, and essentially, yeah, that's problem. Everything is now determined by the United States. They can splutter all they like, and then they go. They're flying. They're all. There's going to be this procession of NATO leaders. Macron, Starmer, probably Maloney. They're all going to go there. Probably Ursula von der Leyen will go, and they're all going to try and oh, we got Ukraine. Um, but the problem is that Trump is now determined on a certain course. We don't know. We don't know where this is going to lead. I mean, this is just he's put
Well,
this forward. We always said he's going to make a big push. Where that leads, we don't know at this stage. But he's clearly made that big push, and the Europeans and the foreign policy establishment and the media are aghast, as we expected that they would be.
well, again, I'm not a psychologist, but we know a lot about Trump. You push back against him, and he's going to push right back,
He,
even if,
he, he,
even if
he,
it's not a good idea. Okay, he's
I,
not going to be. He cannot be. He will not allow himself to be how he interprets it as being outflanked. Okay,
right.
George. Before I forget, I know you're an avid watcher of Rachel Maddow, but she's back on Russiagate. She's back.
Yes, I saw a little bit of that. Yes, she's back on Russiagate. The New York Times is also peddling the Russiagate. This is it goes back to the first term when we saw this strange, very very strange fondness that he had for Putin. Strange because you made it up. It never existed. It was very strange. Totally made up. Yes, yes.
Yeah, but
Interesting.
I mean,
Oh,
what it did was it didn't work for the Democrats.
no,
Okay, in the end, it was a failure. I mean, among liberals, I think they're true believers in RussiaGate. Okay,
right,
they just didn't find the right stuff. They didn't dig deep, and then
right,
Mueller must have been bought off by Putin. They go
right,
into their little fantasy world,
right.
but it
We
didn't.
should we should also say about Rachel Maddow that she had to take a pay cut. But I think she was making 30 million a year, and then she went down to 25 million. But she was only doing one night a week. I think she's back on the 5 nights a week. I think clearly,
I think she's on 4 nights
oh,
a
four
week.
nights a week. Okay, but it makes a difference. I mean, whether you're doing one
I
night a
think
week,
that's just for the
making
first.
her work now. I don't think she likes that.
I think it's the first 100 days. I think that was the first
Oh, is
that
that right?
I think that.
I thought that that's the new thing, that there's going to be
Well, I mean,
new regimen. I mean, look, there's a limit. None of these media companies are making a lot of money. I mean, they can't really afford $25 million salary if you're only showing up for work 1 day a week. I mean, that's a lot that they're paying, and given that she does have drawing power, so I think that it makes sense to me that they're laying the law down. Hey, if you want to keep making this kind of money, you're going to have to do a lot more work.
Yeah, but I mean, this is speaking to the converted. I mean, they're not growing their audience. They're
No,
desperately trying to hang on to what they have. And I mean, I haven't looked at the ratings over the last couple of weeks. I haven't seen any ratings since the inauguration. But I think it just keeps going south. Okay. I mean, they blew it on Russiagate. They blew it the lawfare against Trump. They blew it on COVID. I mean, they're just done. I mean, there is just no the only reason George and I even come across these people is mockery for purposes of
right.
mockery, not
But
for
yeah, that's
information.
true. But all, I mean, MSNBC is a very dismal uh, news network. The only thing that was drawing audiences was Maddow. I mean, however strange it might seem to us, because we find it so disgusting, but there's obviously, there's a niche, there's a market for what she's peddling, which was Russiagate. And so, however, it was quite a small audience. It's not a huge audience, but because cable is I mean, it's essentially a very small audience at cable news. But she was drawing a lot more than all the other, all the Chris Hayes and the rest of
I
that
mean, it
line.
was when Tucker was there, it was
All right,
Tucker, Rachel.
that's right,
That's
exactly.
everybody
Yeah,
else is in the dust.
right,
Okay.
right.
So I just, again, this shows the lack of any kind of imagination. They're falling back on something that people are exhausted
Yeah,
by. It never made any sense.
no,
And they put all the resources that were necessary to get their story, get their man, and they
right.
never
No,
did.
no,
Okay.
and it's not going to work precisely because you did it. This, like, you've already done that. I mean, so doing it a second time, it didn't work the first time, it's going to work even less, and clearly Trump isn't going to pay any attention to that. So even if he was a little uh nonplussed by the this Russiagate attack during his first term, he's not going to pay any attention. I mean, he doesn't care. The New York Times can write its editorials. Oh, there's something very sinister going on between Trump and Putin. Trump just doesn't care about that anymore. So they have to come up with something new in order to get Trump.
Well, and also there's this one, in Munich, George, and I've talked about this, is that, in many ways, the post-World War II era is finally over. Okay. I will stand by that as we move forward. But there's also a cultural break. And I think that that's something that, when the New York Times says the Italian prime minister and the German chancellor say, it goes like this to most people: say,
Right,
who, who are
right,
these people?
right,
They don't mean anything. You
right,
know, in our circles, George and I have talked endlessly about how dangerous and poisonous NATO is, and it is, okay? But for the average European citizen, American citizen, why are you guys talking about NATO
right,
all the What is it? What does it stand for? I mean, it's so niche.
right,
It's so niche.
right.
And I'm sure if some rando normal person popped onto this watching George and I, they're going to say, but what about the price of eggs? Have you guys
Right.
talked about eggs?
Right. No,
I, my
I
wife
think
was on my
right,
back.
right. No,
And what
I
about
think
price of eggs?
I think that's true. However, and I think you'll agree with me on this, I don't think NATO is going to dissolve anytime soon. I
Oh,
think
I don't think it's going to dissolve it.
I think there are too many vested interests to keep that horrible, poisonous,
I,
evil
I, I,
organization going.
I don't think it has a long future, but is it in danger of collapsing now or anytime soon? No, I don't. I agree with you
Yeah,
completely.
yeah,
Why, everyone? Because NATO is not a military alliance. It is a organizing idea. Okay. And George and I have talked at great length, and I think we're absolutely right, is that everything is beneath NATO, that's their organizing principle is NATO. You have the EU, you have the nation states, you have the European Commission. All of them in one form or another have been NATOized. That's why when Trump talks like he does, or Vance, that is a circuit breaker. It's like, no, that's that's not our program, and this is what we've been trained to do.
That's
Train.
right, but that's the thing. But also, there are vested interests involved. So here, for the United States, it's what enables them to dominate Europe, the entire European continent. And so NATO expansion enabled America. I mean, before the end of the Cold War, they just dominated Western Europe. Now it's the entire European continent is subordinate to the United States. That's how the United States projects its power in the world. Look, it's not just us. We got the European continent under our domination. For the Europeans, it's just a wonderful opportunity to enjoy a very comfortable lifestyle. I mean, if they've started all the talk of European army and we're going to, become a serious military force, they're going to have to give up their, the 6-week vacations, universal health care, the guaranteed income. I mean, all the various things that they have lived for, they're not going to do it. And so that's why, there are occasional these sort of spats, these transatlantic spats that we've covered. I mean, they've been going on since the early 1950s, but they never really lead to any serious rift because both sides are getting something out of it. And I think that's what will happen this time. I mean, yeah, they have disagreements about how to approach Ukraine, but the NATO, that fundamental structure, I think is going to survive this.
Yeah, but I mean, what does it mean to survive? I mean, the Roman Empires, lasted 500 years after it actually collapsed, okay, in a meaningful way, okay? It lingered on. I think that's more the case because the U.S. I'm going to split the baby with you, George. Is that the U.S. likes being head of this alliance? It just doesn't want to get involved in it. Okay, you guys organize it yourself.
Right,
Okay,
right,
we still have a veto power. We still own the table that you sit
exactly.
around.
But that's look, 32 countries. That's pretty much the entire European continent, with the exception of Switzerland and
Austria.
Serbia. And I don't know how long Serbia is going to be going to succeed in keeping out of it. I think at some point Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina will be members of the. So the entire European continent, all of it is under American subordination. The Americans don't want to give that up. That's that's their seat at the table, at the head of the table.
Yeah.
We've got the whole of this continent. It's totally subordinate to us.
Okay, well then this is where crunch time comes in. This talk of 5% GDP.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That will break the body politic. I mean, that is the
It
but
ain't gonna happen.
for the reasons George just said is that no more free healthcare. What? Okay.
Yeah, that ain't gonna happen.
I mean, because the European Union, the whole Euro project, is predicated on two pillars, prosperity and security. Well, the way things are going, they have neither.
Right.
Okay, and that is going to change the nature of European politics because it's not sustainable. It's just simply not sustainable. That the United States demands that that's why I said NATO can have a future life, but it might. I think it could evolve into something different. I mean, the Europeans have to decide, and this has been my thesis for a very long time now. If the U.S., this parenthetically here, pulls the security blanket away from them, they're going to make a deal with Russia eventually because they're not, for the very reasons that George just said, they're not going to get rid of their welfare state. No, 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 no. No. Well, and that's what, again, Trump has done it because only Trump could do it. Now we're going to make peace with the Russians. We're going to have diplomatic. Only Trump can do that.
Right.
No one else can do it.
But again,
there are Europeans who are going to have to. They're going to be.
Right, but I just don't think they are going to pull the security blanket from under them because if they did that somehow, America would just have the Western Hemisphere. This is what gives America its global reach, its global power, that they've got the European subordinate. And remember, every time there has been talk a number of times in the past, including during Trump's first term, that the Europeans are going to organize their own security arrangements. And every time it's happened, the Americans were enraged. How dare you talk about these things? NATO, if you want security, it's NATO, including Trump. Remember,
Okay,
they was talk about that during Macron, when Macron talked about, well, there has to be a European dimension. And as soon as Macron said that, Trump said, what are you talking about? We saved you in World War One. We saved you in World War Two. We fought and won the Cold War on your behalf. Don't you even think about leaving this
the
NATO umbrella?
Russians can't say that also about Europe.
But what is Russia?
What we did for Europe. Okay,
Right, but there is no arrangement. I mean,
no, what
I mean,
I'm joking. I'm joking. I mean, because Trump saying what we
oh
did for
well, yeah, but
the
that's just
Russians
Trump.
would
Yeah,
say,
that was
look what
Trump
we
saying.
did for Europe. Okay, I have an idea, and I think we need to pause this because I don't think that we have enough data points yet. Let's see how, if and when, how the Ukraine issue is resolved. Then let's go back to this conversation about because I think it will have a major impact on it. So let's pause this for the time being. And everybody, you know, George and I are happy that there's a movement towards resolving this conflict. They're talking about having talks to talk.
Right.
I'll take that. But
But I agree.
that's a win. That's a win.
That's a good
But
thing.
everybody, it's not going to happen fast.
It's not
Okay.
going to happen fast. And what we do know about, the Europeans, particularly the British, and the British are very clever. They've always been very clever. They're very, very good at pushing the Americans into belligerence. Did that even before World War One, World War Two. They're always very good at that. And I think they, again, the British, but I think there'll be other Europeans are going to try and manipulate the Americans. Again, we don't know whether that's going to succeed. We don't know whether Trump's project will succeed, but there's going to be a lot of pitfalls along the way. And as we've just been looking through Rubio's comments and Waltz's comments, at the moment, all we're talking about is a normalization of
Yeah,
diplomatic representation.
and none of these guys are have converted. Okay,
Right,
they haven't
exactly.
converted.
Right.
Okay, um, uh, they're embracing the faith, but they're not going to be baptized by it. That's the way I look at it. I don't know, George, man. Because of the nature of the news cycle and all of that, we can get all hot and heavy, and
Right.
oh my God, but then something happens, next week or
Right.
tomorrow or
Yeah.
this evening. Okay, are we going to be talking about Governor Trudeau tomorrow? I love that. I just love that.
So,
There are fewer politicians in my lifetime that I've had more disdain for than
right,
just.
right. But that's another thing, which I mean, just to end it, is that what are we going to do when Trump's gone? How boring life will be.
I was
Because
explaining this afternoon. I was explaining this afternoon.
this whole like the
I
Governor
I
Trudeau
know,
thing is
but just think about it. If Trump had been allowed to win in 2020, we'd be talking about a different president right now.
exactly because whoever comes after, whether it's Vance or whatever, that it's not a patch on Trump. They're not as entertaining as consistently entertaining as Trump is. Life will become very boring. I mean that's going to be there's going to be a letdown. We're going to have a serious letdown after
And
Trump.
it's amazing that you say that because that's what I said this afternoon. Peter, what do you think of Trump? And I said, honestly, um, given the nature of my job, I love Trump.
Right,
Okay, he's always given me something to talk
right,
about, to think about.
right.
Do you think that Macron makes people think? Okay, does all the Schultz make you think?
Right,
Okay, you have Annalena Baerbock. She makes me laugh.
right,
Okay,
exactly,
but
exactly.
none of these people have any gravitas.
No,
Okay,
no, no,
and
no.
and, and if you hate Trump, I could perfectly understand why you do. I
Right,
will
right.
not begrudge you that. I will
Right.
never do that.
Right.
Okay.
But that's because back, when we start looking back on the past, all those boring leaders we had. You remember the Bushes, the Al Gores, Bill Clinton. I mean, other than Bill Clinton's kind of, extracurricular activities, there was nothing at all interesting.
Who is Bush Senior's vice president? Dan Quayle,
Dan Quayle, really, really boring. I mean, there was, we had some.
Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah, all these boring elections we used to have, Clinton versus Dole and Obama versus Romney. I mean, life was really boring. I mean, so we've been privileged to have a rather entertaining now 10 years, few more years, but then the letdown will begin.
Yep. Yep. And we'll see what is it they say in Silicon Valley? Move fast and break things. Well, we got another 4 years of move fast and break things. Okay. I'm waiting for the audit on Ukraine. That's my next one. I'm keeping my laser like focus on that. All right, everybody. This is our Friday big podcast. I'm sorry, boys.
A lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about. Okay, this is the Goggle with Peter and George. We're on local, so please go to thegoggle.locals.com. George and I'll reconvene on Sunday. I hope I'm planning on it, but something might come up, of course, and we're going to try our live stream. We got lucky. God graced us, blessed us last week. We're going to try that on Monday, and George is back in the bullpen on Tuesday.
Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. On Monday, it's 10 a.m. Eastern time. And then they got to think about these dogs. I mean, the dogs are ferocious, and they're a little like Zelensky. They don't really understand the concept of gratitude. You give them a piece of meat, and they want to know, well, where's the second piece of meat? And that's their mentality. So it's very hard.
Why not more? Why not more?
Exactly. Why not more? Why not 3 pieces of meat? So if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip them out, dunk them into the tip jar. You're not going to get much gratitude, but you'll be, at least it'll keep them quiet for a while. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and above all, we'll get just a few more hours of calmness from the dogs. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.